This is an example of a social work referral form. In long-term care, the form is typically located in point-click care under assessments, and in other long-term care homes or other residential settings, it may be in a paper form located in a designated binder. When completing a social work referral, it is important to provide sufficient detail in the additional relevant information section so your social worker can effectively move forward in assessing and providing support to your resident and/or their family member. Insufficient information means the social worker will need to connect with you to gather further necessary information. This can pose challenges, particularly if you work on a shift when your social worker is not on site. Issues that may prompt a social work referral include, but are not limited to, anxiety, mental health, consent and capacity, depression, family dynamics, loss or grief, suicidal ideation, co-resident dynamics, abuse or allegations of abuse. Here are 9 examples of situations that may be appropriate for a social work referral. A change in residents' usual behavior. A usually quiet, calm resident is now displaying responsive behaviors. A resident is going into another resident's room and staff are suspecting some sexual activity. Family are constantly expressing concerns to staff about care. Staff suspect a resident is being financially abused. A resident with mild to moderate cognitive impairment seems to be socially isolated, does not have visitors, does not participate in social programs. A resident says they do not want to live any longer. A resident seems to be having a difficult time coping with their declining abilities. A resident seems overwhelmed with their current situation. They are anxious, easily irritated, easily teary. A resident has just moved to the home and both her and her family have unrealistic expectations of long-term care. Why is it important to document referrals instead of providing a verbal referral? A social work referral needs to be documented in the resident's chart as it is information related to the resident. We understand there are times when a referral may be made verbally or by email, but the referral should also be appropriately documented in the resident's chart. All and any support the resident is receiving should be captured in their chart to ensure the full picture of care is represented. Your social worker can identify trends in referral needs and assess whether issues affecting many residents may be effectively addressed in other ways, such as through a therapeutic support group. In conclusion, we hope you have found this information helpful and will make a social work referral for your residents and their families when needed.
This presentation was brought to you by AgeWise Solutions Social Work Services. To learn more about how our social work services can support your residents and families, please visit us at www.agewise.ca.
Depression is a mental health condition many residents in long-term care and retirement struggle with. Many of the referrals our social workers receive, and a lot of the psychosocial support that they provide, is related to residents experiencing depression. It is important to understand how depression may manifest in your residents so you can respond appropriately when needed. Depression may manifest differently from one resident to another. 6 common signs of depression include low mood, including apathy, feelings of helplessness or hopelessness, low energy, isolation, poor concentration, physical complaints such as worsening headaches, decreased interest in activities they once enjoyed. There are various causes for depression, including stressful life situations combined with ineffective coping strategies. For residents in long-term care and retirement, These situations may be related to the grief or loss of a loved one, loss of independence, a decrease in cognitive or physical abilities. Other triggers you may not initially think of include strained family or co-resident dynamics, a history of ineffective coping, financial concerns, including abuse. Your social worker is trained to assess and provide the necessary psychosocial support to help residents work through these challenges. Depression is a serious mental health condition. If you suspect a resident is experiencing depression, please inform your medical team, as medical intervention may be required. Please also make a referral to your social worker. Your social worker has the skills, training, and expertise needed to support your residents' psychosocial needs. In conclusion, we hope you have found this information helpful and will be able to recognize when a resident may be experiencing depression.
This presentation was brought to you by AgeWise Solutions Social Work Services. To learn more about how our social work services can support your residents and families, please visit us at www.agewise.ca.
Working in long-term care and retirement, we each support residents and families who are grieving in various capacities. We can be more effective in our support by being grief literate. Grief literacy refers to using knowledge regarding the experience of loss to facilitate understanding of grief and loss, to use skills to enable action, and values of compassion and care. In a grief literate society, we would see grief being talked about openly, people recognizing signs of grief and being comfortable to support others in their grief. There is a recognition that the only way to care for grief is to grieve. We don't recover from grief, we change from it. Although death and dying occurs on a regular basis in long-term care and retirement, unfortunately, we still sometimes hear about staff being uncomfortable when a resident wants to talk about someone who has passed. We often hear, "I don't know what to say. I don't want to say the wrong thing." And as a result, the opportunity for residents to grieve in a grief literate, supportive environment doesn't always occur. The following are suggestions to help you be more grief literate. Recognize and acknowledge your own grief so you can recognize it with others. You may not know what to say, and that's okay. Sometimes there is nothing to say. Increase your ability to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. Recognize residents may want to talk about their connections and relationship bonds that they have with the deceased person. Remember to use the name of the person who died. People are often waiting for permission to talk about their deceased loved one and appreciate hearing their name still used in conversation. It's important to validate and normalize the personal and individual grief experiences that are shared with us. As you consider your role in your long-term care or retirement home, are there things you can do to increase grief literacy? Perhaps this would be a good discussion question for your home's palliative care committee. Are you recognizing when a resident is grieving, validating their experience, and then making a referral on point-click care to your social worker? Your social worker has the training, skills, and expertise needed to provide grief and bereavement support. In conclusion, we hope you have found this helpful. We hope you will consider what you can do to help create a more grief-literate environment in your long-term care or retirement home.
This presentation was brought to you by AgeWise Solutions Social Work Services. To learn more about how our social work services can support your residents and families, please visit us at www.agewise.ca.
Hello, my name is Rebecca Peterson, registered social worker and clinical lead with AgeWise Solutions Social Work Services. I've been working in long-term care for over 10 years and can relate to working with this vulnerable population. The COVID-19 pandemic has been traumatic for many of us who work in long-term care and retirement, and so we designed the Learning How to Cope with Trauma webinar series. The purpose of this 3-part series is to give you the tools and techniques to help you cope with trauma. This series includes topics about grounding, distress tolerance, and anticipatory grief and loss. Today we will focus on grounding. Grounding techniques help us manage high levels of emotion. These emotions can include anxiety, fear, anger, feeling overwhelmed, panic attacks. Your mind may be racing, having flashbacks of a traumatic experience, or you could be experiencing post-traumatic stress. Developing grounding techniques can help you temporarily distract yourself in a healthy way from those thoughts and high levels of emotion. You are not removing the emotion, and we'll talk about that in Module 2, Distress Tolerance. The purpose of distracting yourself is so you can regain a sense of control, calmness, and feeling of safety. This can help counteract the fight, flight, or freeze response that has been triggered in your amygdala, the part of your brain that regulates emotion. When we talk about grounding techniques, there are a few things to remember. It takes practice to use the techniques and to develop the skills. A technique that works for you one day may not work for you the next. That's why we encourage you to be aware of the different techniques so you can find the best fit for you. Grounding techniques come in the form of sensory and cognitive. Sensory techniques use all of your 5 senses, and cognitive techniques use your cognition to bring you to the present. Here are some examples of sensory grounding techniques. Let's start with the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. With this technique, you want to focus on being present in the moment, distracted from the intense thoughts and emotions that may be ruminating in your mind. You want to start by taking a deep breath, and then focus on 5 things that you can see. You can pause the video to do this. Next, you want to focus on 4 things that you can touch, and focus on the textures, the temperatures. I'll let you pause the video so you can do this. Next, you want to focus on 3 things that you can hear. You can pause the video to do this. Next, you want to focus on 2 things that you can smell. You can pause the video to do this. And lastly, you want to focus on 1 thing that you can taste. You can pause the video again to do this. When you're experiencing high levels of emotion, it can be difficult to remember each step. So here's a little tip. I start with my eyes. So what are 5 things that I can see? I'm touching my eyes. So what are 4 things that I can touch? I move down to my ears. What are 3 things I can hear? To my nose. What are 2 things that I can smell? And then down to my mouth. What is 1 thing that I can taste? Another grounding technique is called visualization. With visualization, you're visualizing a pleasant or comforting image. It may be somewhere that you travel to. It may be a person who brings you comfort. You want to use all of your senses to help you create an image that is as vivid as possible and as real as possible. If you find this difficult, another way that you can approach this technique is to have a comforting visualization written down or recorded on your phone. So you can either read or listen to it at a time when you need the grounding technique. Another grounding technique is to clench and release your fist. Something to be mindful of if you use this technique while you're working in long-term care retirement is, of course, we don't want staff walking around with a clenched fist. So perhaps it would be appropriate to use the technique in the staff room if you find the technique helpful for you. So what you want to do is clench your fist, and as it's clenched, focus on what you're feeling. Do you feel sensations moving up your arm? Do you feel one finger is clenched more tightly than another? Is one of your nails sharper than another? Focus on what you're feeling and then release the fist. Let the emotions and the feelings go out. What do you feel now? How do your fingers feel as you're moving them? Also focus internally. Are you starting to feel calm? Are you starting to feel that sense of safety and security that you're looking for with using this grounding technique? Another technique is to have an object, such as a rock or a ring, something tangible with you that you're able to touch and focus on. Focus on how it feels in your hand. Is it hard? Is it soft? Is it getting warmer as it's in your hand? Is it smooth? Take time to focus on the object as opposed to the emotions, traumatic thoughts, and the experiences that have been ruminating in your mind. Another technique is where you focus on your breathing. Box breathing or square breathing is an example. With this technique, you use the box or the square as your guide. So you inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. And then do this as many times as you need to benefit from this technique. Another fun technique is sucking on sour candy, because it's very hard to focus on anything except the sour sensation that's in your mouth from that candy. Now that we've discussed a number of sensory grounding techniques, let's talk about 2 cognitive techniques: coping statements. These are statements or affirmations that are truthful, positive statements that we use to replace the untrue thoughts we may have while experiencing high levels of emotion. Examples include, I can do this. Even though I feel a lot of anxiety, I can do this. This won't last forever. I'm doing the best I can, and that's okay. Another grounding technique is using aspects of the mini-mental. So you can ask yourself the questions: where am I? What is today's date? What day of the week is it? What month is this? What year are we in? It's a way to focus your thinking on the present. So you're not thinking about what has happened, not thinking about what might happen and the fear that can come with that. It's focusing on right now. Now that we have learned about the different grounding techniques, how do you know if a grounding technique has worked for you? Something that we find helpful when you recognize that you're experiencing that high intense level of emotion is to ask yourself before you start a grounding technique, on a scale of 1 to 10, what is my level of anxiety right now? And remember your number. Then do a grounding technique. Afterwards, ask yourself, how would I rate my level of anxiety now? Remember that you may not see significant changes. Gradual progress is helpful. You may find that you need to do the technique a little longer, or perhaps you'll find that the technique just isn't helpful for you and you need to try another. That's okay. Think of the other techniques and try it. How can you use these techniques when you're working on the front lines in long-term care and retirement? Well, when possible, stop and focus on your breathing. You can do the square box breathing. In terms of a tangible object, if you're folding the laundry, focus on what it is that you're folding. What is the texture like? What is the temperature like? If you're pushing a resident's wheelchair or a food cart, focus on the handles. What do the handles feel like? Are they warm? Are they cold? Are there grips? Are you wearing your name tag? Which hopefully you are. Touch it. What do the corners feel like? If you're wearing a stethoscope around your neck, how does your neck feel? How does the stethoscope feel on your neck? Focus on the details and bring yourself into the present moment. Perhaps when you're in the staff room, you could close your eyes for a minute or 2 and do some visualization, either on your own or if you have a visualization recorded on your phone. Take a moment to listen to that to help bring you to the present, to help you feel calm, in control, and safe. You may find that focusing on coping statements is helpful for you. You can also approach developing coping statements as a team. So perhaps there's a piece of paper up in the staff room where staff can write down the statements that they have found helpful, motivational, and calming. These statements can be shared with others who may be struggling to find coping statements of their own. In conclusion, we hope that one of these grounding techniques has resonated with you and that you will try it during times of high emotion. Now that you've learned about grounding techniques, we hope you will join us for the rest of our 3-part series. In Module 2, we will answer questions such as, what does it mean to tolerate distress, and why is it important? You will learn how these important skills can help you in your work on the front lines in long-term care and retirement.
This presentation was brought to you by AgeWise Solutions Social Work Services. To learn more about how our social work services can support your residents and families, please visit us at www.agewise.ca.
Hello, my name is Rebecca Peterson, registered social worker and clinical lead with AgeWise Solutions Social Work Services. I've been working in long-term care for over 10 years and can relate to working with this vulnerable population. The COVID-19 pandemic has been traumatic for many of us who are working in long-term care and retirement homes, and so we've designed the Learning How to Cope with Trauma webinar series. The purpose of the 3-part series is to give you tools and techniques to be able to cope with trauma. This series includes topics about grounding, distress tolerance, and anticipatory grief and loss. Today we will focus on the second part of the series, distress tolerance. Distress tolerance refers to your ability to be able to cope with distressing emotions in the moment and to resist the urge to escape or avoid the pain of the emotions. You are not removing the distressing emotions, rather focusing on decreasing the intensity of them to a level that you can manage. This allows you to be mindful of the emotion and help you resist the urge to make emotionally driven choices that could potentially make your situation worse. When you make emotionally driven choices, this is called distress intolerance, where you urgently try to escape from or avoid them. Your response is reactive, unhealthy coping strategies that you feel are temporarily helping you but may actually make your situation worse and cause problems later. Examples of this include overeating, excessive drinking of alcohol, drug use, sleeping too much, overspending. Something important to remember is that distressing emotions are normal and can actually be helpful at times. So fear and anxiety, for an example, can help us to be alert and safe and identify if the fight or flight danger response is needed. Distressing emotions are also not permanent. They will eventually pass. They may come back, and that's okay. You can either fight the emotion or let it be present with you and sit with it and observe it. I'll explain this by using a finger trap. If you try to fight the finger trap and pull your fingers away, the trap tightens and you can't release your fingers, and you may actually feel some anxiety. The only way to free your fingers is to allow and accept what's happening, and then move your fingers together further into the trap. This creates more space in the device so that you can then remove your fingers. The same concept applies to coping with distressing emotions. You need to allow the emotion to be present, accept it, and experience it, so the emotion can then gradually pass. The more you do this, the more you learn and believe that you can cope with distressing emotions. Here are a few distress tolerance skills. TIP technique. TIP stands for temperature, intense exercise, paced breathing, and paired progressive muscle relaxation. The idea with each is to create a physiological response that helps to decrease the overwhelming feeling that you're experiencing in the moment. So temperature. You want to decrease your temperature, particularly on your face, as this can have a jolting effect in your system and help to calm you much more quickly. You can do this by splashing cold water on your face or holding some ice or an ice pack and putting it on your face. Intense exercise. This can be running, dancing, a brisk walk for approximately 10 to 15 minutes. In doing so, you become too tired to ruminate on your emotions or act on them. If you have a medical condition that may be affected by intense exercise, please speak with your doctor before using this technique. Paced breathing. This involves having the exhale longer than the inhale. So inhale for 4, exhale for 6. Paired progressive muscle relaxation. The clench and release fist grounding technique we discussed in Module 1 can be used with the paced breathing. Another distress tolerance skill is the use of distraction. Once you've been able to bring the intense level of emotion down, perhaps using the TIP technique, you want to be able to keep that level of emotion down. You can do this by further distracting yourself in a purposeful activity. This might be talking with a friend, going to see a funny movie, participating in a religious activity, doing some cooking, some gardening. You are aware that the emotion is still present, but you're purposely putting your attention elsewhere for a period of time, kind of like taking a break. Another distress tolerance skill is radical acceptance, and radical meaning fully. This can be really helpful if you're struggling to accept something that you need to accept, like a problem that can't be solved or a difficult situation that can't be changed. Acceptance does not mean approval. It means accepting that it is what it is. You may not like the situation or want to accept it, but that doesn't change the fact that it's the reality. What's important to realize is that by accepting the reality, you can control your experience within it. Let's apply this skill to the work you're doing on the front lines in long-term care and retirement during COVID-19. As you know, it's required for you to wear full PPE when you're with a resident. This, of course, has posed many challenges, as it's harder for residents to hear you from behind the mask. They're not able to recognize your once familiar face. And for residents with dementia, this is even more challenging, confusing, and scary for them. You can't change the fact that full PPE is mandated and must be worn. You can control your response to wearing it though. So you may be angry and act out on that anger by speaking rudely and impatiently with your colleagues, which negatively affects your working and relationship with them. affects the atmosphere in the workplace and will cause emotional pain. Or you can recognize that you feel angry, but choose to accept that full PPE is required and ask yourself, how can I deal with this situation in the best way possible? So perhaps you then talk with your teammates to identify effective strategies that they have found in interacting with residents in this new way. In conclusion, we hope you have gained a greater understanding of distress tolerance skills and will try them during times of distress. Now that you've learned about grounding techniques in Module 1 and distress tolerance skills today, we hope you will join us for the rest of our 3-part series, which includes anticipatory grief and loss.
This presentation was brought to you by AgeWise Solutions Social Work Services. To learn more about how our social work services can support your residents and families, please visit us at www.agewise.ca.
Hello, my name is Rebecca Peterson, registered social worker and clinical lead with AgeWise Solutions Social Work Services. I've been working in long-term care for over 10 years and can relate to working with this vulnerable population. The COVID-19 pandemic has been traumatic for many of us who work in long-term care and retirement homes, and so we designed the Learning How to Cope with Trauma webinar series. The purpose of this 3-part series is to give you the tools and techniques to help you cope with trauma. This series includes topics about grounding, distress tolerance, and anticipatory grief and loss. Today we will focus on the 3rd part of the series, anticipatory grief and loss. Anticipatory grief is about preparing yourself and accepting an upcoming loss, as well as preparing for and accepting the many losses you may experience along that journey. As we talk about anticipatory grief during this module, we'll be referring to the COVID-19 pandemic and the many losses associated with it. There are different types of loss. Ambiguous loss can be used to describe the losses experienced during this time. This is when there's a loss without closure or a clear understanding. You may try to keep finding answers that can't be found. This can delay your grieving process. You may find you are currently experiencing many losses, one right after or on top of another. These losses may include loss of residence in your long-term care home or retirement home. Perhaps you've lost a loved one of your own. Loss in your routines at home or at work. Loss of norms. Loss of time to do the things that you wanted to do, like spending time with your family or going on a vacation. It's important to know that anticipatory grief has similarities to grief. So emotions that are often felt during the grieving process, such as anger, sadness, shock and disbelief, forgetfulness and isolation, can also be experienced with anticipatory grief. Working on the front lines, you may experience the emotions with an increased intensity, as you're also dealing with stress and exhaustion. Everyone grieves differently and in their own time, and that's okay. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross has identified 5 stages of grieving, namely denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. These stages of grieving can occur at various times during the grieving process and in any order, and may also be experienced with anticipatory grief. As you work through anticipatory grief, consider the following. The time when your adrenaline will slow down and the resulting physical, mental, and emotional exhaustion is felt. You may already be feeling exhausted, but may feel it more deeply later due to the trauma you've experienced, particularly as you stop to think about what you've experienced and the reality of that sets in. Preparing yourself for the first and the new norms to be established. So a birthday celebration that doesn't have social distancing rules attached to it. Going to the grocery store again if you weren't the one who was assigned in your household to take on that responsibility during this time. Being able to interact with residents on the front lines again without wearing full PPE. There may be many overwhelming emotions that come from experiencing these and other firsts. Taking time to think about what those firsts and new norms may be, and anticipating how you might experience them can be very helpful for you to cope with trauma. Let's talk about some approaches to anticipatory grief. So self-care. Are you getting enough sleep? Are you taking time to exercise, even a little bit? Are you taking some time for yourself? Are you avoiding emotionally reactive, unhealthy coping strategies, as discussed in Module 2? Self-reflection through journal writing. Take time to reflect on and write your thoughts in a journal for the following questions. What losses have you experienced during COVID-19? What are some previous losses that you've experienced? How did you cope with the previous losses? Are there lessons from your previous grieving experiences that can help you now? You can become an expert of your own grief. Other questions may be, what do I wish others knew about my experience? What have I learned from this experience in my professional life, in my personal life? How has this experience changed me? In what ways am I still the same? How have I been resilient through this experience? What brings me joy? These questions may be difficult to answer due to the trauma you've experienced, but it's important to reflect on them so that you can begin moving forward in a purposeful way to regain feelings of happiness, to have fulfillment in your life and to make connections with others again. Another approach to anticipatory grief is to prepare for and recognize the potentially wide range of emotions that you may experience and the connection there is with your negative automatic thoughts. So these are thoughts that come and go quickly without you even realizing that you had them unless you're paying attention. So are you in autopilot, just going through the motions? Are your emotions escalating and intensifying? As you're paying attention to your emotions, also pay attention to what happened and what you were thinking right before the emotions started to manifest and or intensify. As you do this, you'll gradually notice your triggers. So the events and or patterns in your thinking, your negative automatic thoughts. For example, you may think, I don't care, and then experience an increase in anger. As you recognize that this is a typical thought for you before you become angry, you can evaluate that thought to help you remain calm and avoid making emotionally driven decisions that you may regret later. So you can ask yourself, do I really not care? Well, actually I do care, and that's why I'm so frustrated and angry. And then look more into the meaning of the thoughts and the emotions. By drawing on the grounding and distress tolerance techniques that we discussed in modules 1 and 2 that you've been practicing, you can let the emotion be present without it overwhelming or controlling you. You can then begin evaluating and giving meaning to your thoughts and emotions to work through your grief. Another way to help you with anticipatory grief is to identify and accept the things that you can't change. As we discussed in Module 2 regarding radical acceptance with radical meaning fully, you need to accept that many routines and norms prior to COVID-19 will not be the same, and you can't change that. New norms need to be developed. How you choose to experience these new norms is up to you. So perhaps take some time to ponder, how am I going to move forward in accepting and experiencing these new norms? And maybe you can't answer that right now, and that's okay. But at least as you start thinking about it and preparing yourself, you can come to this acceptance at the time when you're ready to do so. While grief can be very personal, it may also be experienced collectively. As you're working on the front lines in long-term care and retirement, you may be wondering how you can grieve and support each other. Perhaps as a team with resident council and family council members, you may choose to create a memorial, such as a newly planted tree, or create a visual in the home, or purchase a special bench for the home to honor all those who have lost their lives during the pandemic, to recognize the residents who couldn't leave their rooms, to acknowledge families who couldn't physically be with their loved ones, and to pay tribute to your efforts as staff who work tirelessly to support the residents and their families during this difficult time. In conclusion, we hope you have gained a greater understanding of anticipatory grief and hope you will try the different approaches to help you work through your anticipatory grief. This concludes our 3-part series, Learning How to Cope with Trauma.
This presentation was brought to you by AgeWise Solutions Social Work Services. To learn more about how our social work services can support your residents and families, please visit us at www.agewise.ca.
Hello, my name is Rebecca Peterson, registered social worker and clinical lead with AgeWise Solutions Social Work Services. I've been working in long-term care for over 10 years and can relate to working with this vulnerable population. Working on the front lines in long-term care and retirement, you are at risk of compassion fatigue. It is important to understand what it is, how it may manifest, and effective coping strategies. Early recognition and intervention is important. Compassion fatigue refers to the emotional and physical exhaustion that may be experienced over time by those caring for people who are ill or in distress. It is an unintentional consequence of being empathetic towards those we care for and support. Compassion fatigue may result from various factors, including exposure to trauma, overworking, neglecting self-care. 7 common signs of compassion fatigue include physical and emotional exhaustion, disrupted sleep, irritability, numbness or emotional disconnect, intrusive thoughts, decreased sense of purpose, feeling overwhelmed by the suffering of others. Here are 5 coping strategies to consider. Self-awareness and normalization. Recognize if you are experiencing signs of compassion fatigue and normalize how you are feeling. There are work-related quality of life assessment tools you may find helpful. Increase your compassion satisfaction. Make a conscious effort to identify and focus on positives. Increase personal self-resilience. Develop a self-care plan addressing your physical, emotional, environmental, spiritual, intellectual, and social well-being needs. As you complete this plan, keep the following questions in mind. Who can I connect with for support in each area? What coping strategies have I used before that may help me now? Increase collective resilience with your team at your long-term care or retirement home. Set aside a couple of minutes during or after the huddle meeting for staff to share coping strategies that have helped them. Post paper in the staff room for staff to write helpful coping strategies. Recognize and celebrate successes and positives together. Seek professional help when needed. In conclusion, we hope you have found this information helpful in identifying and coping with compassion fatigue.
This presentation was brought to you by AgeWise Solutions Social Work Services. To learn more about how our social work services can support your residents and families, please visit us at www.agewise.ca.
Hello, my name is Rebecca Peterson, registered social worker and clinical lead with AgeWise Solutions Social Work Services. I've been working in long-term care for over 10 years and can relate to working with this vulnerable population. As we continue through the COVID-19 pandemic, we are becoming increasingly aware of the mental health impact the pandemic is having on our residents and ourselves. Emotions such as anger, sadness, and fear are being experienced at intensified levels as we try to understand the trauma we've experienced and face the uncertainty that's before us. We are in month 4 of the pandemic, and many of us are beginning to feel survivor's guilt. Survivor's guilt is feeling guilty for surviving a traumatic event when others did not. You may ruminate, questioning whether you could have done something different to prevent the traumatic event or to have saved others. It's important to know that survivor's guilt is a common response to traumatic experiences. Individual experiences may vary in intensity and duration. As we move closer to the next phase and residents in your long-term care and retirement homes are able to once again leave their rooms and interact with others, they will see who of their friends and co-residents have survived and who unfortunately died. It is important to be aware of survivor's guilt and how it may manifest so residents can be appropriately supported. Survivor's guilt may manifest through flashbacks, rumination, and irrational thinking about the traumatic event. Feelings of anger, irritability, social isolation, sleeping difficulties, headaches, stomach aches, helplessness, apathy, suicidal ideations. If you suspect a resident may be experiencing survivor's guilt, please make a referral to your social worker. Your social worker has the skills, training, and expertise needed to support your residents. As staff working in long-term care and retirement, you may also be experiencing survivor's guilt. Perhaps prior to COVID-19, you were supporting 2 long-term care or retirement homes and had to make the difficult decision as to which one home you would continue to support on-site or remotely. Maybe you worry that some residents may have had a different experience had you chosen to be at their home instead. Perhaps you are diligent with your adherence to the infection control measures, and yet your home still experienced a COVID-19 outbreak, resulting in some residents contracting the virus and dying from it. Here are a few suggestions to help you work through survivor's guilt. Recognize, accept, and allow the feeling to be present. As you are distress tolerant, you will be able to decrease the intensity of the emotion to allow you to evaluate and work through the feelings of guilt. You can learn more about this in our Learning How to Cope with Trauma webinar series. Self-care. Make a conscious effort to take time for yourself, to get proper sleep, to eat healthy, and to engage in healthy coping strategies. Recognize what you can and cannot control. You can't control what happened or will happen because of the virus. You can't control who got the virus or has died from it. You can control what you do with the feelings of guilt. You can learn from the experience and share your feelings with those you trust. You can put your focus on doing something positive and productive to help others. You can change your perspective of the situation, moving your focus away from the why questions that can't be answered to finding increased meaning and purpose. Recognize that happiness can coexist with feelings of guilt. As you work on the front lines, celebrate successes together, such as being declared a COVID-19 free home. Regardless of the challenging situations before you, such as wearing full PPE with residents, find joy and satisfaction in engaging with residents, helping to bring a smile to their face through your interactions with them. In conclusion, we hope you have found this information helpful and will recognize when a resident is experiencing survivor's guilt. We hope you will make a referral to your social worker. This presentation was brought to you by AgeWise Solutions Social Work Services. To learn more about how our social work services can support your residents and families, please visit us at www.agewise.ca.